But the what you kind of
So
described there is more like who's more oppressed. You know, that kind of like competition amongst who has the more oppression or pay attention to me. You know, because you see that anyways, like if I speak up for BLM or Black Lives, then I get shut up sometimes, like because I'm First Nations. So, you know, there's that kind of oppression amongst oppressed, right? Whereas the need to put an X behind Latin seems to me to be more about the fact that there just is a gendered descriptor there. You know, I hear what you're saying
you
for
know,
sure.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I also, but I not but, and I also feel
They're
like,
just different layers, is all the thing is, right? They're both
yeah,
valid points, right?
I think that both are efforts to give visibility to folks who don't. There's yeah, who are looking for ways in language
Right.
to show themselves and their experiences.
Yeah.
I think it should be a choice. Like when I did the census that I almost got fined for not doing, they gave me like 20 different categories that I could be part of. And I'm not a Chicano because I wasn't born here. And I'm not a whatever else. They had Hispanic, they had white, what was it, non-Hispanic white, then they had Mexican, and they had Cuban, whatever. Like they threw all these things and I grabbed one. As long as it's not what we define as white, they'll grab that and shut your mouth. So now they should just add Latinx for people who feel identified with that because they feel the language does not speak about who they are. But, French, Hebrew, there's a bunch of languages that are um, genderized and they are random. Like they say a table is feminine and a chair is masculine, or like there's weird stuff that you could go back and say, that's sexist. Like why everything that lays down and good.
I remember actually being a kid in French because I grew up in bilingual Ottawa, and I remember actually making a choice not to learn French because it pissed me off that if you had a group of 50 women and there was one man in the group, it had to be a masculine, and I was just like, I don't want to know that. I'm not into it. So similarly, if they'd found a way to, Lomex, I might have been more akin because it is a genderized language, and English has made some attempts at non-gendering, like actor or waiter or server rather than waitress, but I have I get bothered by gendered language. So just when you
I,
mentioned French, yeah.
I think it's interesting how racialized the English language is. I mean, when you talk about immigration, people are thinking Mexico, or when you talk about black and all the negative things that are associated with it, us work in similar ways. Um, yeah, I think that they work in similar ways.
Also, one
And
more story. I'm interested in what Amber with names. I was wondering if you had anything to say about that.
Yeah,
Love
actually
that
I did
story.
because here in Canada we have a slightly different so it actually happens in Vancouver all the time where um, Asians come here and have to find their Canadian name. Like it's really bothersome to me. Like met so many Asians and I'll be like, "What's your name?" And then they're like, "Joe is my Canadian name." Like, "What?" And this is what we require of them. Well, not like, as a society, it's obviously not required from the government to like get rid of your name and give yourself a new one, but pretty much I would say 90% probably of Asians living in Vancouver have a Canadian name that they've just given themselves so that they don't have to repeat their name over and over again because our tongues, this is what the article said, which I was like, yeah, we give that excuse. Our tongues aren't used to it. Well, people learn 8 languages. There's polyglots all over the place. We learn how to speak many languages. We can figure it out, you know? And there's just such a polite way to do that. And I'm a hairdresser again. I have to ask people pronunciations of their name on the regular. It's not hard to do. You know, it really is not a hard thing to be like, sorry, how do I pronounce your name? And somebody who has a name that is deemed difficult to pronounce, they're used to that. You know, they prefer that you ask than you just brutalize the saying of their name. I don't know. I just think it's a loss of politeness in the world.
Let's
How
talk
do
about.
you,
Just think,
can I,
Go ahead.
just a quick question that makes me think of the folks who use the gender pronouns and how initially I remember the first time I encountered someone that wanted to, it was like, no, they, them, they. I was like, what? Because I had never thought about something as simple as that. You know, simple, a very simple request.
I
But
saw.
we ended up having a conversation about just the hostility that was like directed towards them for simply asking to be referred to as they or them. You know, I just think that it's really interesting how all of these things connect with but the with the way that we recognize people, because I think that that falls into the category of power when you if 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 the expectation is that you're going to take the time to uh, to try to find out how someone wants to be identify their, you know, how they want to self-identify, then you're not um, you know, diminishing their humanity. You're actually highlighting it because you're taking the time to see who they really are.
And why is it plural? Why is it they or them when it's just one person?
Because it'd be like, rather than saying he went to the store, they went, or they said this. It's gender neutral.
well, and they and them isn't always plural, right? It can be actually
Yeah, it's
used
not.
as a singular. It just is somebody who doesn't want to who doesn't not want to. They don't identify female or male. So
Hmm.
so they want to not be he or she. So it's again part of that language thing where we don't actually have to assign a gender when we're talking about someone, you know? And I like also was a little, and I grew up with an outed gay father. So this stuff I feel really like open to, but when the conversations first started where people wanted to be like termed they, I also was like, whoa, that's, you know, a whole new way of thinking. But I find myself now as I try to like make it more of my habit that it's if I'm not sure, I'm trying now to go to just they or them when I'm talking about somebody. If I have no idea what they want to be coined as. So
And
I think that's an easy thing that we can change our language structure to, you know, to just be like they or them because it can be plural or singular. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
but then you get labeled PC when you say things. You know what I mean? That that's what's frustrating. You know, because siblings, spouse. I mean, we don't have to necessarily, but I guess in those instances where gender is a must, you need to know, um, then you go there. But yeah,
That's like really limited when a need to know basis, you know, that's a medical professional really who needs to know what hormones you actually have in your body or what sex organs you have. It's a very minimal amount of people that actually need to know that information,
yeah,
I think.
I
I have a
agree.
question. I want to see how radical you're willing to go. So
Oh.
Okay, is he coming out with it? What's is your doozy question?
Ask them.
if we're gonna take it all the way, like, why don't I get rid of our English or Spanish names? Like, why not go all the way to have a native name or African name, or in case of Angela, a Roman name back from her ancestors who they were tribesmen and in Rome before it became an empire or a nation. Why not like take it all the way back and stop using these ridiculous colonial system? Because the Chicano activists, for me, get on my nerves because they start talking about the New Aztlan, that it's this mythical place, that it was in Oregon, and that's where the Aztecs came from, but they don't speak Spanish. And even Spanish is a colonial language, so they should be speaking Aztec. And then, they tell me that Mexico's so wonderful and they never even been there. So if we're gonna go all the way, like create our own nation of people from the earth and people who are outside of these systems that were imposed on us, why not go all the way like that? Like people in the 70s, they were getting rid of their slave name, or was it in the 40s with Malcolm X and people like that? Like, why not go that radical?
Well, I know in our culture, there's definitely a swing back to that. Like, there's a lot of people who are taking back traditional names or naming their, like, I would say kind of the under 30 generation is a lot, like, are now starting to get named more traditionally. So that's certainly in my culture anyways starting to be seen. I've noticed.
What about you, Angela?
Not so much. I still see quite a curious, more an offset of modernity where the uniqueness of names is what's trying to be found, which can lean heavily into appropriation. But then again, as radicals, I was going to bring up, this is not necessarily my culture, but I forget the language, but there's a couple alternate, people that have tried to spark a universal language or a different way of communicating with simpler words so that there's less room for miscommunication, for easier ways to express with each other. But yeah, I found in my very immediate community, most of my friends have very, very colorful names for their children. But not necessarily. I actually tend to bring up, there's been a lot of discussion in groups lately, or communities that I have that are a bit more conscious of tradition and where names come from. So doing ancestral history, because it is quite a lot of diasporic communities that are, everybody's a little, whoa, where is the ground? So second generation, third generation is trying to actually learn what the history is of their colonial role. And to instead of just feeling this inherent guilt, it's like understanding the positionality of every player within the history. And then also I often bring up, what does your name mean? Like I'll ask people, I'll go look up people's names and what is the actual tradition, like the history of a name that you're actually being called. So mine is Angela, which is angelic, so a creature from the god. My middle name is Sarah, royalty, and then my last name is Famous, so the Italian Fama. And it's interesting what it feels like to own my name, even though it doesn't, to me, does not have anything past just my mother's choice to make those names in me, But I think a title is so important, and when you don't respect how someone says their name or what they are choosing, I have so many times I've asked people, "What's your name?" and they'll say, "Oh, my English name." I'll say, "No, like." Cool, but which name what is your name? What do you prefer? They're like, oh no, it's gonna be too, you won't. And I'm like, I'm asking, like I want to actually know your name. But culturally it's being so brought in, it's like, no, there's no space to share my name here. So I think it's so disrespectful to not hear another's title, whatever it is they choose to call themselves, whether it's a gender or whether it's a name. Yeah. Little rant. I'm done now. And I think it's such an honor when it's shared with me. I feel like I'm being trusted enough to be told when people do tell me.
How about you, Jerald? Have you come across people getting rid of their Americanized name, or making it a point to name their children different names from different cultures or something they connect with?
I mean, it happens. I'm an American. I feel like I have an American name. My name, since we're doing name stories, means man on a horse throwing a spear. Believe it or not, that's what Jerald means. But I think that there's a cost to doing that. Now within the Black community in particular, if you're applying for work, or you've heard that story, for jobs, and you have a Black sounding name, whatever that means, that you may be taking yourself out of the pile for consideration. I think that, but because the demographics of the country are changing, I think that there's probably going to be a tipping point where people are much more accepting of names that don't sound like traditional or American names or European names. And I think that, but it won't be an easy transition. And someone you see it a lot within the Black community, and so I would say, yeah, it's happening. But I think more it may change because of the time that we've had with Trump in office. People may, now that they're so much more comfortable pushing back on different people who are different. You never know. Like you say, you believe, you were speaking earlier about the woman who may have thought that you didn't have a Mexican heritage, but if you had a Mexican sounding name or a Mexican name, then who knows what would happen in that situation.
Well, she was aware that I was born in Mexico, so that's even the saddest
What?
part. Yeah. So, but again, the way I
Well, she was
look and
being
the way I
hurtful.
talk, huh?
Visual, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
So,
get that part. So she was being uh, a pain in the butt.
right. So so some friends of
But
mine
I
and
don't.
I were discussing how you can love an artist for their art, but you can hate them for their personal life. I won't get into people who have been outed as perverts or hurting people, whatever, but they're very talented and they have a lot of you know beautiful stuff to bring to humanity. Uh, can European culture be that? Can we say, all the pillaging and the raping and the destroying of people's cultures and taking away their freedom and stuff like that? Well, that's horrible. But, they made roads and they brought trading routes and they brought art and a little bit of culture, whatever. Can we do that? Like, is that allowed? Or because that's another thing that people would say, well, are you trashing all of European influence in the world, or are you just focusing on the things that are hateful, like slavery and the pillaging of native lands and stuff like that? Have you guys ever thought about that? Because I think there has to be caveats to have a conversation. If you walk into a room and you say, "This is bull. I'm done with this, system. I want to create a new system where everything is beautiful and we all get along and stuff like that," you get kicked out as the crazy hippie who's just disruptive. When you
Have you
say,
tried
"Well,
that? Have you tried that?
yeah,
Personal
actually,
experience?
among other hippies, like it's weird when you start hanging out with hippies, you realize that they're very conformist. They
Mhm.
pretend that very like out there, but then in reality, they have a system, and if you venture off from that, then you're the problem. But Gerald, when you say, being an American, like I remember when I was interviewing people from the South in Tennessee, and they're like, we're proud of being Southerners, and then I would be like, what are you proud about? And they get quiet because no one had ever asked them that, and they're like, well, our food and our values and this and that, and I
Are you
was
talking
going,
about white Southerners or Black Southerners?
well, it was white Southerners.
Okay.
And they were like defending the Confederate flag and they were defending their thing, and like I'm in Texas and I'm like, we're south and we don't have any Confederate flags and I don't know what you're talking about. But so there was this thing of like pausing and realizing that do they really have that much to be proud of? So American culture and American, identity, what are the things that we can be proud of? And the same would be with Canadian. Like, do you guys feel like, I'm proud to be a Canadian? Or it's like, I'm just here, um, they they took over and they built it into something, but like we need to get back to the original Canada or the original America or the United States. Does that ever come up? Like, what can we appreciate from the this culture that we live in, and what can we toss out to try to make it better? Did I
I
stomp
mean,
you?
I get this question all
I'll
the
do it for
time.
you.
What's that, Gerald?
No, go ahead. You said you get this question all the time.
Yeah, I do get this question all the time because being First Nations, and when you're in advocacy for First Nations, I get it all the time. And in particular, my white family is the one who probably posed a very similar question to me the most about what do I want? Like, do I want to just like, do I even want to be Canadian? Was actually posed to me. And it's like being half, it makes it even much more complex. But I think the question is a funny one because it's like asking melted cheese to go back to its other form. It's a chemical reaction that happens. You can't like reverse it. So like we're here today in a society that is very mixed in North America, whether you're talking about Canada or the US. Like there is no such thing as completely undoing it and going back to where we once were. I think it's like we have to, and the fact that we even talk like that is detrimental to progress because there is no, that, that just keeps us fighting. It keeps us also like segregated amongst ourselves. It's like that's to me not the way to progress. We need to progress the conversation by saying what's next, not, and that will take things like acknowledging different cultures, acceptance of all cultures, allowing an equality amongst genders, cultures, all, LGBTQ, everybody, and just in some kind of an acceptance of cultures within cultures. We talked about that too. Like within one culture, there seems to be an idea that we all First Nations are the same. We all have the same philosophies. We all, which couldn't be further from the truth and lacks the color of what humans actually have. So I don't know. It's suggestive of a black or white, this way or that way. But everything is so gray. So I don't know. Personally, I have a hard time with that question because you can't, we're not going back. That's impossible. We're not going to erase roads. And of course, there was good things that came. And it's like no one's trying to erase the good things, just like nothing's all evil or all good. We live in a yin yang. So there's obviously going to be good things, but that doesn't take away from the bad things that happen, just like the bad things that happen don't take away from the good. They just are, and they coexist together.
Well said.
Thank you. That was
I
like
mean,
a
I feel
rant, I
like
guess.
no, it wasn't. It's a difficult question to ask because I mean, you can go in lots of different directions. I mean, the question on what I'm proud of with regard to what we've created, I think that I'm going to make it pretty narrow it down a bit. I would say I'm very proud of the resiliency of Black people in this country and the culture that we've created and how it's contributed to American culture. So much of it's like the foundation for so much of what is called what people know as American culture, and I think that that's really positive. I don't think we have to go back to anything to be recognized, to be looked at as humans, to be authentic. I think that what that we should continue to push to be fully embraced, as people, and whatever we decide to call ourselves, whatever clothing we decide to wear, or you know, traditions we just want to continue. So I don't I don't I don't see a deliberate effort to go back to any kind of way of being necessarily. I think if anything, people are pushing to find ways to highlight commonality and coming together, or at least making space for people to do it.
What do you think, Angela?
I think very well said to both Amber and Gerald. They both said many of the things that I would also share. I was thinking about a writer, an Indigenous writer. I believe the title of the article I was thinking of is Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, but I'll send it to our group and maybe it can be in the access, like for a link for people to read from. But it's a woman that talks about respecting the histories of the cultures, like modernization or traditional understandings, whichever tradition we're speaking of, and recognizing that. So I'm going to take that. She was talking about, again, we can't go backwards. So where we are now, seeing the strengths, and how can we work together? How can we combine? How can we be appreciative of differences, appreciate, like, aware, again, like what we're talking about, a safe space to be heard and seen, but also with that awareness of that we are a globalized world now. It's a hybrid, like straight root tradition. It's very rare that there are areas that haven't been touched by colonization, and some things like Canada. I love that during COVID I've got healthcare, like I do, and it feels so fucking privileged. Pardon my language, but and I was actually speaking with my younger brother about how I grew up as a punk, an artist, like modern world as an artist outsider, individual. So politics to me was all bad. It leaves me really unknown, like uneducated. And now because of COVID, I'm like, oh, I have an appreciation at least for an attempt that's being made at a community that protects each other. So that needs to be expanded. That needs to include all of the community, like the people, the bodies that are sharing this space, the lands that we're talking about. But it's how do we move forward from where we're at, as opposed to, wiping one part out or only seeing the, allowing change. Some people that do bad things have to do that to learn how to do good things, and if you don't forgive, we don't go far as a human, right? So does not mean to just carry carry on though. There's so much that needs to be changed. Yeah.
So we're gonna perform an experiment, and I want you guys to participate in the experiment.
Uh-oh. I'm scared.
Little look in your eyes, and I was like,
In 10 years, I want to run for office. I want to run with the Green Party for Congress. And I know that whatever I say right now is going to be digged up and people are going to like tear it to pieces. Try to like, so I'm actually doing the opposite. Like, I'm going to say something and I want you guys to tear me apart and tell me if I'm crazy or not. Because I think that's the issue with cancel culture. Like, somebody says something and everybody jumps on it and like, oh, that person's a piece of crap, get rid of them. And there's no conversation, there's no discussion, there's no opportunity for them to redeem themselves or to explain themselves or work through the issues. So I saw something that I'm a very passionate person from what you can tell so far, that I see something, I react or overreact, and then it blows up and then it gets worse. So let me tell you what happened. So a friend of mine decided to post a documentary, it's like a report on cultural appropriation in Japan. And they had these like gorgeous people from Japan who are in love with. It's funny in the video they use three different terms and they're actually contradictory, but they use them all together. They use the term cholo, they use the term chicano, and they use the term I guess Mexican and American, and they're supposed to all mean the same thing. So whoever did the report didn't even do their homework because they're all different. So if you guys know anything about LA in the 1930s or in the 80s or 90s, there's this mentality of wearing like tank tops and beanies and like goatees and people wearing really tight clothes, the girls, and then the boys are wearing flannels or whatever, and they're riding low riders and all this stuff. So that comes from a place, and I'm gonna discuss that. But in the video, they have this nice lady from Japan who wants to dress like the movies that she saw from the 90s, and she's dressed up like a, I guess, a Chicana or whatever from LA, from East LA. So and then she goes to a tattoo artist and she writes a pinche loca on her chest. And pinche loca means damn crazy person or damn fool. And it's like offensive. Like it's like calling yourself the B word. Um, but it's in Spanish and it's like, and she's Japanese. So she's taking something that she saw in an Instagram account or whatever, and she's putting that on, wearing dark lipstick. She's walking around with like baggy clothes, and then she goes and hangs out with these guys who went to LA and they saw lowriders and they brought that to Japan. Can you hear me, Jerome?
Yes.
So so then they say that there's a rapper who raps in Japanese, English, and Spanish, and she went even further. She has like a heart with fire on it, and then you go to her house and she has calaveras and she has saints. She has all rosaries and all this stuff, and it's just like a little out there for me. So this was my response. But first, somebody else, when they saw the video, they said nobody culturally appropriates like the Japanese. One of the best rockabilly bands I ever saw were some Japanese guys who could barely speak English beyond hawking their merch, of course. So I hear that in Japan there's like a cultural struggle because they want complacency or everybody to be the same. So there's people who are rebelling against that. So the way they portrayed it in the documentary was that they were honoring Latino culture. But one of the ways they honor Latino culture is that the girl was buying clothes online and she bought like a prisoner costume. And that was one of the outfits that she wore. And it was like an orange suit with numbers. So then that brought a reaction from me. And then the other thing is that we're using the term cholo. Cholo means gangster in Spanish or someone who's like a rebel. And then they were mixing cholo, Mexican American, and what was the other term that I used? Chicano.
Chicano.
So Chicano is the activist from the 70s. So this was my response, and I want to see if you guys think I'm a judgmental fool or do I have a point. At first, I was confused. Then I was impressed. Then I thought they were posers. Then I felt that not even people from Mexico understand prison culture, which is being confused with political activism. Then they started talking about worse stereotypes, and the rapper lady just made me mad. Reducing someone's culture to rosaries and calaveras is idiotic, and since she has nothing to do with any of those things, it's just a big joke and a way of exploiting a look. Americans do this all the time, so there is nothing to be excited about. When I had dreadlocks, people made fun of them, but my Rasta friend said that the hair does not mean cultural appropriation if you have hair that is able to do that. I saw the reasoning behind dreadlocks from Rastas as being a biblical concept that we can all relate to of finding beauty and strength in your hair, no matter how it looks. I also felt a connection with their struggle and their sense of otherness. This video seems like these individuals are wearing Halloween costumes, and I would love to see if their burritos taste right or are worse than Taco Bell. They show the Japanese guys eating burritos while they're hanging out in their lowriders. So just a lot of stuff that was stirred up in me. But then I told my wife how I felt, and she's like, "Okay, leave it at that. Don't post anything anymore. You're gonna make people mad." And I was like, "No, I'm so mad, and I think this is so terrible." So I just kept on going. Then I posted again. If I sound defensive or judgmental, think about this. Some of us Latinas would like for people not to assume that we're all into what I call self-destructive modes of expression. Tattoos and bandanas might make you look cool and be done in an artistic and creative way, but they're often associated with criminality and antisocial behavior. If you're cool with that, awesome, but just like I had to cut my dreadlocks to get employed in the healthcare field, some of us might have to compromise a little. Conformity is terrible and a sad way of living, but is the reality we have to struggle with. I want for my daughters not to have to choose between cholo living and modernity, but know that you can be many things at once and don't do things that pigeonhole you to a lifestyle that is not helpful or moving the community forward. But getting stuck in 1940s barrio mentality is tribal, sexist, and self-deprecating. Boom. I know that's a lot to unpack, but uh, the last part is like the most problematic one because then people are going to come after me and say, "So you're saying that dressing up as cool 1940s pachuco or whatever they were doing, that's self-deprecating and then that's self-destructive." And the reason that I say that it is because that's how we were depicted in movies. And they were saying that their favorite movie was um, American Life or one of those movies where there are people, there are gangs fighting against each other. And they were saying that women were depicted as strong. And for what I know of certain kinds of people in my community, it's actually very sexist. They're always women have to look a certain way to be appreciated. And then they threw in the movie Selena, and Selena had nothing to do with gangsters. Selena was a Jehovah's Witness, and she was part of the different type of community. So they were trying to say, well, they're not only criminals and gangsters, they're also, famous people and successful people like Selena. So there was so many things that stirred up in me, and again, I am very, easy to get upset or to make a fuss. But since you guys haven't seen the video, that's a lot to put on you. But it's a lot. It's kind of like in the movie Good Indian, they show how in the 70s everybody claimed they had a Native American ancestor, like their grandma was a Indian princess, and then you would see them with a headdress and with like little lines or like with the headband, and the guy saying nobody wore a headband in any tribe. So they always use these stereotypes, and like the Japanese are like, oh, this is what they do in the movie, so that must be reality. And I know that if you put tattoos in certain parts of the US, you actually get picked up by the police because they mean certain things. So it's an act of privilege for a Japanese wealthy young lady to put damn fool on her chest because no one's ever gonna catch her or assume things of her because she's not a true Chicana who's putting her life on the line or afraid of cops or whatever. So and then they had a scholar saying that the Chicano activism brought about rights for farmers and this and that. And it's like, again, you're mixing gangsters with activists, with just normal Latin Americans or Mexican Americans, or people who just came from Mexico. You're mixing them all together and putting them all into one pile of what you saw on TV. So that's where it brought up all these issues. I see Amber wanting to say something. So what do you think?
No, I just was actually reacting to what you're saying because it's like it's everywhere. I mean, it's honestly like a conversation that I've been personally having a lot and just trying to find that there's a really blurred line between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. And, being in the beauty and fashion business, this is a conversation I'm having all the time, and I find it very interesting, and it's obviously a line that we haven't actually defined as like a society even. So I find it fascinating. But what I find interesting is two things about what you just said. Is the comment that, oh, the Japanese are so good at cultural appropriation. I find the hypocrisy of anybody who lives anywhere in North America saying something like that just so wild. Especially since, I don't know, 15 to 20 years ago, almost every North American was putting some kind of Japanese symbol on their body as a tattoo. So, it's like we're all doing it. I think is really and we're all somewhat appropriating, and I'm trying to really, again, wrap my brain around when is it appreciating the culture, like, and when are you actually appropriating the culture? So what you've said is like such an extreme. That's character. That's like making a character out of a culture. They've made a character, a caricature, It's like a cartoon. And I find it hilarious because I've heard stories of Japanese symbolism tattoos being put on people like upside down, backwards, etc. Like it's the ignorance, the unknown ignorance of it all. Like to write such a funny, it's like putting squaw on your chest. Essentially, it's what you're saying to me, and it makes me like laugh because now you're just really, literally making yourself look really, really dumb. So. I don't know if that's much insight. It's more just commentary, I think I just gave you.
And real quick before we move forward, when I got dreadlocks, it was a struggle because I'm like, people are gonna assume certain things about me, and my family, I knew they weren't gonna like it, but I found an Argentinian singer who had dreadlocks, and it kind of boosted my confidence in getting them because I'm like, there's another Latino who appreciates that, and he sings reggae, and then there's a group of Rastas in Peru or Bolivia, and they're actually part of the Rasta community, and then there's a group of Rastas in Israel, and I was like connecting with like different groups, even though I wasn't a Rasta myself. I had a friend who I met afterward who was very open, and he wasn't offended. He felt that it was kind of like it was like neat that someone would be interested in doing that because it comes with a stigma. The moment that you have a certain type of hair, you get discriminated or people assume things about you. So it wasn't like you are mocking us, you're actually like joining us. And it was kind of like part of that like spiritual understanding of, your body is sacred and you're like honoring it in a different way. So I don't know if he was flattered, but at least he wasn't offended or felt that it was an issue. And he was a convert to Rastafarianism, and he was very welcome because they have a very open perspective. Now, if you were into another type of thing where they're closed, then maybe it would be different. So I think that's the element that people don't think about. It's like if a Japanese person moved to East LA and they grew up around people who were into that culture, it would be different than if someone just takes it and bastardizes it and makes it. And then if they would have taken the best elements of it, like you're like, I'm gonna do the Japanese version of this cool cars and cool makeup or whatever, then I would appreciate it. Be like, wow, they reimagined it. But it was just like we're gonna copy it to the T from what we see on Google. Like it wasn't like layers or like we're gonna take a trip to Latin America to find out more about the Calaveras and the Virgins of Guadalupe. Like it was just like flat out, I'm just gonna buy a bunch of crap online and put it and make it look like an altar, and that's it. So I know that Picasso would take African symbols and incorporate them into his art. Eminem has a song, and I think it's like publicity stunt. He claims that he bought a bunch of African symbols and gold and jewels, and he went to a mall and he got beat up because he wasn't even half black and wanted to wear that. But he actually put that in the song because one of his first songs was very racist, and he was trying to say, no, I'm not racist. I'm just someone
Yeah,
who
this,
struggles with identity. Um,
this
Jerald or Angela, do you have any thoughts?
Gerald, I will please speak.
Hold on, I've got a kid knocking at the door. I'm on a call. I don't know. I didn't have I didn't have as strong of a reaction to that situation. And I don't know if it's because I don't have this expectation that people would kind of do the research and rethink a cultural expression or characteristic as, to rethink it in a new and present it in a different way. I just feel like we're living in a time when people do dip in and borrow, or who are drawn to things that take them outside of the boxes that maybe they feel that they've been put in. I don't know. Just I didn't have a strong of a reaction because I guess I don't have that expectation that people would do that. And some of it maybe because of the way blacks have been depicted in this country over time, in partnership with the marketing media community, so I don't know. I don't have a strong reaction at all. But I do think that it's good to let people know, um, if you feel that they've kind of crossed the line, and if their presentation of your culture is hurts or harms you, is hurtful. Because sometimes people borrow something. As I think we talked about this a while back. It was like Miley Cyrus with the twerking when she did it on MTV or something like that. No one had ever thought about it. It was no big deal. But her presentation is also tied to, and their response is also tied to the black community in some way, because the origin of it came from our community. Yeah, so that's it. That's all I got.
What do you think,
Um,
Angela?
I've thought about cultural appropriation quite a lot, and just what the definition is, and a lot of the people I'm learning from or referencing from. It's a newish term to be used culturally and socially, and I think it is a hard one to grasp. And so far, there's been a lot of understanding of if you're taking from a culture and from a dominant culture, if you are pulling from another culture and you are gaining benefit from that, that becomes appropriation. If you're making money or you're taking an identity and you're taking from another, that's like so far the elevator pitch on the definition between appreciation and appropriation. Like I can appreciate. I'm a Vipassana meditator. I sit and I meditate in a style that's being taught from Goenka Ji, which is not a Canadian teacher or any one of my heritages. But I don't then go and teach that and make money from it. I reference people to him if they want to learn that. But with your situation in specific, the thing that did pop, I did have that like this similar point that Amber made of to start off by saying the Japanese are so because the world is doing it, and just to remember not to tokenize one person for a cultural huge problem like that. When I heard that story, I felt empathy for both. Not saying that like her action is ignorant, but it's capitalistically she's looking for what she sees as being an identity that's freer or exciting compared like without knowing. And I don't know, maybe that's it. I don't know, but it like so I can only hypothesize, but it seems like she's one person representing a very big cultural imbalance for ideas of expression or freedom, and then appropriating that and not recognizing that action causes your body when you see it to react and to feel slightly appropriated and misunderstood and disrespected, and I think that's huge in you because it's triggering to a culture that does that we were talking about microaggressions, like it's everywhere. And that's a huge sign of it. So it's easy to go, yeah, that her bad, but not sure she even knows what she's doing. Like not sure she's aware of how deeply rooted what her choice. She might be like, oh, it looks really cool, or like it's. And if she doesn't know it, why is she in a position where she can't see that? What is her culture teaching her? Where are we all coming from in that story? So I feel your pain, but what I also really liked is when you started out by saying that you're running for office, and I feel like that, like, where are you putting your energy? Where is it the most beneficial? Like, because that's a lesson about culture huge. And we can't, like, if we pick at the one person, like that person that you could try and talk to, but you know they're never going to have compassion, that's just hurting you to even try and engage with that person. So how do you take that message that you're trying to share and what you're repeating and share that into a much broader, it's exciting, that observation and how to give it more power, more fuel to be heard, to a wider audience, that instead of like the system itself as opposed to the person that's a part of the system, right? Not that
Well,
that's super easy.
that's the last question for this session is, do we waste our time? And they mentioned this in the panel after the showing of the Native American, the film about the exploitation of Native American stereotypes and stuff like that, is, do you waste your time, answering someone on Twitter for their disrespect or their lack of sensitivity, or do you fight for bigger issues? And they're saying the time that you're spending complaining and pointing out the evil or the bad things that other people do is time that takes away from your creativity and from your ability for your artistic talents to shine for the sake of your people or politics or whatever you do that could bring the community forward. So that would be my issue with microaggressions, because now it has even become corporate. I took a sensitivity training test, and we talked about this in the show, where now it's just a checkbox or a certificate that you get, like, I am not a racist because I know not to say these mean things in front of people, or at work. Now I can say them at home, but I don't say them at work. And then the stereotypes they had is like, if you tell someone you must be smart because they're Asian, that's a microaggression. It's like, come on, man, that's a compliment. Or they did some other silly ones like that. So do we really focus on that and we make it another checkbox, or do we like fight institutional racism and just lack of kindness? Because I think that if we make it all about race, or we make it all about sexism or whatever, sometimes we forget that the ultimate goal is for people to be kinder, for people to be more aware and interested in the well-being of others, to not have a callous heart where you just don't care what they think. I know someone who's very progressive and very active and stuff like that, and they say things that are very hurtful because they think that's part of like their personality, like, I'm just, a tough person that gets things done or whatever, but they're unaware of how they come across as very forceful and careless for the feelings of others. So you can get into this like warrior mode where it's like, yeah, we're gonna, dismantle the system and stuff like that. But the way you're doing it is part of the aggression and the conflict. Instead of, like we were talking last time, is like you're bringing healing and you're bringing a greater understanding through a different mode instead of this constant. And maybe that's where I need to learn to not be so like, well, let me slam you with my post and respond to your stupid post. And it's like,
Thank you, just read my mind.
anyway.
I don't know, David. I don't think that when you're responding that it's as aggressive as you're being told, or that you're allowing your filtered viewpoint. I think that you're quite eloquent. I don't think there's much aggression there at all. This is not the first time that you've asked for my opinion on something, you've responded to somebody, and I never actually think that there's anything but education there. I think there's a little bit of your own conditioning happening, where society has told you, or other people have told you, that you need to calm down. I really don't feel like you're being aggressive or confrontational in anything that you've shared with us up until now. So I just want to say that, number one. And again, this is like you being in your conditioned state, but I also, like, I don't know, I really oppose cancel culture. So like, I really don't think that will bring us anywhere. It's actually just going to stop us right in our tracks of any kind of advocacy or advancement. So as far as answering certain people, like I get asked this often because my whole media is about advocacy. So I often will respond to people who are tone deaf, like, and I get asked like offside or in private messages or whatever, like, why do I respond when that person is clearly never going to hear me? And the fact is like, if this was a one-on-one conversation, I would probably just be irritated inside and walk away, because the only person affected by my response is me and that person. But when you're talking about on social media and you have a following that's reading your posts, I like to think anyways that my response is landing at other people and therefore affecting change. People who maybe aren't interacting, people who maybe aren't as overtly, I don't want to use like racist per se, but like people who don't see the racist tendencies, might have an aha moment from my response to that overt racist that came on my page or whatever. So, and I think our expectation of creating change in one conversation is also a bit egotistical. So like, just because somebody walked away and we think, oh, that did nothing. Well, we don't know that that did nothing. They could be thinking about it for hours, weeks, years, and then eventually get to a place of like understanding. So I don't know. I mean, do I want to go to battle with a bunch of trolls all the time? No. Like, that's emotionally draining and definitely not what I signed up for when I decided to go more into advocacy. But like, at the same time, I also picked advocacy as sort of a route that I'm doing. So I have to expect to have the conversations, I guess, too. Because earlier in about how the legacy of advocacy because of your success, like there is an expectation if you're from a marginalized community that if you're successful that you will automatically go into some kind of advocacy for that group. And I think that is also super unfair. Like, it's certainly a great platform that you can now utilize, but I don't think it should be an expectation that they now speak for their communities or that they advocate for the community either, because it takes an emotional toll on somebody to just expect that just because they're successful that should be their next stage is, I don't know, not really. It's like assigning a role to somebody that they didn't ask for. So I don't know, did I answer a question or did I go on a tangent?
Well, I just appreciate that you guys being willing to partake a 4-hour conversation about all these topics, and I think we need to be there for each other. We need to support each other because whenever you're doing something new, whenever you're trying to address issues, there is that self-censoring or that hesitancy, like what is it gonna be taken out of context, or what, like
Mhm.
now it's like there's this fear that anything that is put online will never disappear, it'll be there forever. And it's like, you know what? I don't want to live in a culture where every single thing that comes out of your mouth is scrutinized, because like that, that is the true censorship and the true thought police, where even discussing things now can be problematic. And if I didn't care, I wouldn't be talking about this. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of people that say, well, I have better things to do to be talking about race in America and the Americas or whatever. Um, and to even be willing to learn. Go ahead, Angela.
I wanted to say, just on keeping with that, when I did that and I was like, oh, you read my mind. I actually thought my body was like, don't say that. Because to go with what Amber's saying, I appreciate, like, when you were talking about, do we, go for here or go for here to make change? Any way that you feel the space to make change, do it. Like if that made you feel that, say that. Like I fully support whatever action anyone needs to take. Some people are better at this area in making change through like change to legislators. Some people are better at speaking one on one. Some people are better like this. Like wherever your voice needs to go is how I think it needs to be done. Like we're all working together to shift a system, right? And many systems intertwining. And I'm so appreciative of the different energies that push each of us and come out in the way that we speak our own unique way of sort of with with peace, but also with intention for change activism. So
I think it's just an interesting time that we're living in. And I think that because of it, we need to, or I need to, strive to be as open as possible, and patient, because there's a lot of uncertainty out. But I think that if we're trying to promote good things, hopefully that'll come back to us. Good things will come back.
And we appreciate everybody making time to be part of this conversation.